Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studio, it's time for Family Business Radio. Showcasing outstanding family businesses and the advisors who assist them.
Good afternoon. You're listening to an episode of Family Business Radio. I'm your host, Anthony Chen. Today we have an amazing guest with us, Jacqueline Jensen with EOS Worldwide. She's got a unique family business story to share with us. Welcome to the show, Jacqueline.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I look forward to being here with you today.
Great. So kind of share with our listeners, what is your background, your experience having worked in the family business, and what brought you into EOS Worldwide?
Yeah, this is a loaded question, though. We'll jump right in. I grew up in an entrepreneurial home, and not only an entrepreneurial home, but also a home led by a Marine, because once a Marine, always a Marine. So I grew up in this household, which meant that it was very structured and disciplined and deeply focused on your sense of achievement and what success looked like. And so our dinner conversations didn't generally revolve around what we were doing that weekend or how we felt about something or what was going well in life. It was more about maybe the business goals happening or a lesson on money management or maybe what we had accomplished that day. So from an early age, I was immersed in this world of business. And I also had a front row seat to watch our family business, right? My stepfather had been an entrepreneur all of his life. He owned and ran his own business. And I had this front row seat to watch him and to also see how he interacted with other family members who were working in his business. So on a positive side, I thought that business seemed pretty fun. It was like a puzzle. It was challenging. I was really intrigued by it. But then on the other side, this front row seat gave me a way to witness how conversations were had and conflict was handled and maybe how other family members were treated in the business. And so for me, I said, maybe family business isn't for me and this isn't what I want. So ultimately, I ended up wanting to make my own way. I went 9.5 hours away to Florida Gulf Coast University in Southwest Florida, majored in business with a sports management concentration, and ultimately found my way in sport tourism for a little over a year after I graduated. And then my stepfather came down. We had a great conversation, but a conversation where he made it very clear that he felt I was making a poor decision not coming back to work in the family business. So following that conversation, I felt a little bit of obligation, that obligation to come back, take responsibility, this responsibility to him to continue the legacy, to continue to run and help and learn this family business and carry it on. And looking back, I think a lot of, for me, it's the second generation, but in some cases might be third or fourth generation. But looking back, I feel like a lot of second generation leaders carry that invisible weight. We're not just joining a business, we're also stepping into a legacy, into family dynamics, into decades of unspoken expectations. And oftentimes that second or third generation leaders do this without much clarity. So maybe no defined role or path, no succession plan, and no conversation around what growth or even ownership might look like for them. So for me, what it looked like when I came back and ultimately stepped back into the family business, I stepped into an executive trainee program for about 2 years, which was an amazing opportunity. I got to work in several areas of business, so administrative, financial, operations, even some marketing, which is not my specialty, but I certainly learned a lot there. So it was a great opportunity and an experience I likely wouldn't have had in an organization that wasn't my family's business. And then a little later, my stepfather, in 2011, my stepfather purchased another business. And in this case, it was a private country club here in the area. And at that point, I started being placed into leadership roles. Again, without a clear roadmap, which is not unusual for family businesses. And so in that case, I stepped into these roles and then found myself just having to figure it out, which again, not unusual. I think we'll dig into this a little more as we move through the podcast. So jumping forward in my story a little bit in these leadership roles where I was trying to figure it out, I jumped in. I was working 70 to 80 hours a week, just kind of spinning my wheels, trying to feel, how do I lead the business? How do I lead my team? How do I keep my stepfather happy? How do we beat last year's numbers? How do we keep the members happy? And really reached a point of burnout ultimately. And I wasn't willing to give up. I stuck with it. But ultimately coming around, I turned to books. I said, I can't be the only kind of person in this situation that feels like they're lost or spinning their wheels. So I turned to books. I figured there had to be a better way. I ultimately came across the book Traction, which is the book all about EOS. So Traction by Gino Wickman. And that spelled out the entrepreneurial operating system. And when I read that book, it was as if all the business and leadership principles that I had previously tried to learn and teach and implement in the business were tied up into one great system. We self-implemented EOS at the private country club I was at with my leadership team. It stuck. We saw a tremendous transformation. Culturally, the members were thrilled with what their experiences at the club. And then ultimately, we more than doubled profits the last 3 years I was there, and I was just so moved by how transformational EOS was for our team. I felt like other entrepreneurs and other family business owners needed to learn this system as well. At the end of the day, some promises were broken within our family, and I chose to leave the family business. And at that point, I said, I know exactly what I need to do. Let's grab Traction. Let's go learn more about EOS Worldwide and see how I can join their team to spread this amazing operating system with other family businesses and entrepreneurs.
That's a very, I know we were probably just scratching the tip of the iceberg in terms of detail. Now, as you were growing and more or less swimming, teaching yourself how to swim after being thrown into the deep end, and you kind of share your story of, well, you weren't just going to give up, even though you were at that burnout stage. As you were looking to develop systems and learning, what other things along the way that is very memorable to help you get through that burnout? Obviously, of course, reading Traction, that's one of the major turn points, but what other turn points along the way that you can do? Yeah, no, I can handle this.
I think that it's more the responsibility that comes in working in a family business. You don't want to let your family down, right? I didn't want to let my stepfather down. I didn't want to let my team down, and I didn't want to let the members down. In this environment, in a private country club, they've paid an initiation fee. We've made them a promise, and I wanted to fulfill that promise for them. So even in those times of burnout or kind of wanting to give up, there was too much on the line to quit. And maybe I'm just too stubborn.
That, or you also take what we call extreme ownership.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That ownership piece is so important, and so important in great leaders, not to pat myself on the back, but it is so important for leaders in that role. And I think that extreme ownership is something that every family business owner or leader can relate to, because it's not just a job you're showing up for. You're showing up as an owner, you're showing up as an employee, you're showing up as a leader, and you're showing up as a family member. It's hard to quit all of those.
Now, getting even more personal on the question now, there's a lot of these shows and movies out there where they portray a particular family business. Some are all rainbows and butterflies, and there's those that are just like a mob movie, like The Sopranos. In your experience, how Hollywood, or how true, or actually, or rather still filtered they are in terms of a lens that we as a public that are not in the family business are seeing?
Yeah. I will do my best to answer this question, Anthony, but I will be honest with you. I am not a big TV or movie person. I think a lot of those shows are based in fact, or based in reality. I've had several folks kind of witness my story pretty close hand and bring up the show Succession.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
And mention that having some very similar parallels. So while there is certainly a maybe entertainment piece that is required to capture the attention of an audience, at the end of the day, a lot of the same pressures and stresses and pieces, elements of those shows is very real to many family business owners and leaders.
Now, you brought up earlier in the show, you talk about the second generation or even generations beyond. There's that, whether it's responsibility or as you would use the word obligation. Was that pretty late early on at those dining room table conversation? Or was that like way much after the fact?
Yeah, I think it's a combination, right? To grow up in a family where our leader, my stepfather, was an entrepreneur and a Marine. And again, going back to especially the Marine side with the structure and the sense of respect that you have for elders and the responsibility you have for your place in a family, and thus then what's expected of you, filtered into being a leader in business. And I think for those who do take extreme ownership, or for those who want to make parents proud or the founders of the company proud, you carry that weight with you. And that's a weight that many folks don't understand or can relate to if you aren't involved in a family business.
So as you're now working at implementing EOS systems around the world, not just around, but more specifically here in the Southeast US area, do you have a particular stories of a family business client that you're working with who are almost like a replica of you, but you're able to get there before, for lack of a better word, hitting the fan? But hey, I see where you're going. There's a better trajectory.
Yeah. Every story is very different. A direct parallel, I haven't come across that exact situation yet, but one of my clients is a family business, and it's neat. They are second generation. It's brothers. They are second generation. They've purchased a business from their mom and dad. So already a huge accomplishment, because I think it's only 30% of family businesses really make it to second generation. Yeah. And then that percentage drastically decreases from there to third and fourth. And so these two individuals have successfully purchased this business from their parents, and they've been operating it for over 15 years now. But they reached out to me and said, hey, we've heard about EOS. We have another colleague in a similar space who has implemented EOS in their business, and she's raved about the transformation it's had for her, and we would love to learn more. And it was so interesting because when they first reached out, this one particular brother made it so clear, hey, I recognize that we are succeeding in spite of ourselves.
That's rare to hear from a business owner. Yeah.
And so neat all from the get-go, from that first conversation, to see the level of ownership and reflection that they have on themselves, to be able to look at themselves and say, hey, we don't know what's going on here. We're somehow just succeeding, and there has to be a better way. And I loved that just transparency and vulnerability from the get-go. The opportunity to increase team health in that type of environment is just endless, right? And that's such a huge part of what EOS focuses on, is creating healthy teams. So taking that team, I've worked with them for a few months now, and the main tool that we've really dug into that's created a lot of clarity for them, we call an accountability chart in EOS. So an accountability chart takes a structured first approach at building out what most companies call an organizational chart. So taking that structured first approach at building out your accountability chart, it's what positions, what seats do we need? And then what 5 roles or responsibilities is that seat responsible for? And once we've decided what is the best structure for the organization, now we start putting names into these seats. And where a lot of family businesses go a little sideways is you're hiring people who you trust, right? So maybe it's your son, or it's your cousin, or it's the uncle, or your spouse. And you're taking the approach of, oh, I'm going to bring, let's call it Uncle Joe, right? We're going to hire Uncle Joe and bring him into the family business. And what can we have him do? Oh. And so you're plugging Uncle Joe into the needs of the business versus looking at that structured first approach and then saying, is Uncle Joe the best person for this position? Because ultimately, family business leaders most want to see their business succeed and continue on. There's that legacy component that's really important. So if we take that structured first approach at building an accountability chart and having clear roles and responsibilities for individuals, and then finding the best individuals to fill those seats, now we're adding and more guaranteeing the success of the business. And sometimes that involves family business, or sometimes that involves family members, and sometimes it doesn't involve family members. Sometimes family members aren't the best.
Yeah, and that kind of touches on, I imagine, a sore spot for some listeners out there where they are in a position where I gotta have XYZ, let's call Uncle Joe, where everyone likes him, but when it comes to business implementation, it's Uncle Joe. We would not have noticed Uncle Joe not being there. Like, how do you have that kind of hard conversation?
Yeah. And this is where we deep dive into another tool in EOS. So the entrepreneurial operating system helps make business leaders better at three main things: vision, which is just getting everyone aligned on where we are going and how we plan to get there; action, which is instilling discipline and accountability into the organization so that everywhere you go, you see people working towards the ultimate vision of the company; and then healthy is building open, honest, vulnerable teams that enjoy spending time together, because sometimes we don't. I would go back to answer your question. I go back to, how do we create that clarity and vision, right? What are the goals for the business? Where do we see this business in 10 years, in 3 years, in 1 year? What are our priorities for this quarter? And at the end of the day, everyone in the organization has to be on board with what is best for the business. Set our egos aside. What is best for the business, and get really clear on, as I just mentioned, the vision. Where do we see ourselves in 10 years? But also, what are our core values? What's our core focus? And then how do we get where we're going? And then you plug back down into getting the right people into the right seats. Now, what's really unique with family businesses, kind of tying back to that question that you asked, is there's three main seats that business owners can wear. And sometimes I say hats, and business owners will chuckle, especially family business owners. And you're like, no, I'm wearing 97 hats, right? No, three main hats that you might be wearing in a family business. So you might have some ownership. Do you own a part of equity, part of this business? So you have that ownership hat. You have an employee hat, which is a position you might own, that seat you might own in the company, and those 5 roles or responsibilities within that seat. And then you're a family member, right? And at the end of the day, family should be the priority. We need to be family first. And so knowing and gaining clarity on when you're wearing what hat is really important. And so the tools within EOS help provide the clarity necessary to have the hard conversation, so that business leaders are more listening and leaning on what is best for the business and where we are going and what the roles are and what individuals really want, to help find the answers to those really difficult questions and conversations that need to be had.
So if we could wind back the hands of time, what would be, knowing what you know, what advice would you give to yourself, let's say, call it 5 or 10 years ago, knowing what you know now?
That's a really good question. Ultimately, I wish I would have found EOS earlier. Mm-hmm. I found EOS the last 3 years I was with the club. And so I went about 8 or 9 years of spinning my wheels, just trying to figure it out on my own. And I was the queen of, in a week, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, at the end of the week, or at the end of the month, or at the end of this quarter. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure many family business leaders can relate to that, where that light at the end of the tunnel just doesn't come. There's always more. There's always something that can be done. Yeah. And so ultimately, obviously, I wish I'd found EOS earlier to implement that. The other thing would have been to maybe just push a little harder early on clarity of roles, clarity of succession planning, clarity of what legacy looks like for my stepfather. Yeah.
So build on top of that and weaving the EOS into this, because you're working with a lot of family business owners. How do you also bring about the conversation of succession? Because it sounds like you've been working with second generations. Has it come to a point where you are brought in after they've had that conversation, or they haven't had that conversation yet?
A lot of times they haven't yet had that conversation. They recognize that conversation needs to be had. And I think one of the challenges there, and probably tying back to my last answer too, is first generation founder of the business, their self is very attached to the business itself. They very much have an idea of what they want for the business and how they want the business to serve them after maybe they retire. But it's also very difficult to let go of what they've been doing for 40, 50, 60 years. And so I think that it is so important to just create that clarity and have those hard conversations between first generation and second generation, which is then coming in with this idea that they're not entitled. I think that's often something that's thought about second or third generation, is that they feel entitled to the family business, or they should just get it for free, or it should just be handed to them on a silver platter. And I don't think that's the case at all for second generation or even third generation. They are coming in, they want to continue the legacy, but they want a clear understanding of what does that look like? What does leadership look like? Am I able to continue this business successfully, but maybe it looks a little bit different than how mom or dad did it in the first generation? And is that okay? And so they have a lot of like, how do I make my parents proud? How do I continue their legacy? There's a lot of that ownership and wanting to take care of the business and the employees and have it continue on. And so I think just sitting down and being able to have those really real, vulnerable, open and honest, clear conversations is so important for both generations. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer that question?
Which then leads to the follow-up question is how, in your experience so far, which of the group tends to be the one that initiates that, or would they require someone like yourself to come in to get that ball rolling, because it's very hard for either side to address the elephant in the room?
Yeah, I think you just said it. It's exactly that. It's the elephant in the room. And so both first generation and second generation, or current generation and future generation, both want to tackle that elephant in the room. They just aren't sure what the right platform is, or maybe aren't comfortable doing it without a mediator, which I'm not going to say I'm a mediator, but I am a facilitator. And so my job is to come into those rooms and ask really good conversations to draw out the answers in a space that maybe feels more comfortable just having a third party there. And so who's initiating it? I've seen both parties initiate it. Oftentimes that founder or that current generation is looking and saying, hey, I have my child working for me, an adult child. I have my 30-something working for me, but I just don't feel like they have the skills to take on the business and lead it the way that I have, or to do the things that I've done, or they don't have the financial sense to really lead the business well. And I don't know how to train them on that. So they're coming and they're saying, hey, I recognize these challenges. How do we bring this next generation up to speed so that I feel comfortable handing this business off to them? And other times it's been that next generation that comes in, much like these brothers I mentioned earlier, who come in and say, hey, we now have children. And what does the future of this business look like? Like, we recognize right now that we're succeeding in spite of ourselves. And I don't want that to be the feeling that my children walk into should they choose to pursue taking on this family business in the future. So let's start now, where we have 10 or 20 years of runway to better organize this business, to operate more efficiently, to optimize, to grow and scale. And then we can start having better conversations as our children get a little older on what working in the family business looks like. What would their role be? What would succession look like with multiple children in the next generation? And they'll be ready to have those open and honest conversations then in the future. So I think it's both. It just depends on the family business. There's so many nuances in family business.
Yeah, it sounds like, as you mentioned earlier, you might have found a unicorn. It's very rare to, having worked as long as I have, where even to the second generation, they have the foresight to not just see, okay, we were lacking on some skill sets, but now they want to avoid making the same mistakes and already preparing succession for the third generation and beyond. And the specific term or language you selected, or maybe they selected, was whether or not they want to be involved, as opposed to obligating them, or in this case, the prior generation, assuming next generation, oh yeah, clearly they would definitely want to jump into this when we haven't even had a conversation with them.
And I think that's a transition we're seeing with generations as well. A lot of maybe those business owners who started their business and are now 70 or 80 years old, and they're seeing their 30, 40, or 50-year-old children maybe come into the business, or they felt obligated to come into the business because that a little more senior, a little more wise generation felt like, oh, they just made the assumption. Of course they would want to work in the family business. Why would you not want to come and continue this legacy? Where business owners now in their 30s, 40s, 50s are starting to say, hey, I recognize that my children may find their own path and they may not want to work within the family business. And if that's the case, then what? But regardless, I'm going to prepare my business for a future without me. And that's where those family business owners are starting to reach out to folks like myself or exit planners and start to have the foresight of, it will take me years to prepare my business for a proper sale if I want the valuation that I truly want or need for retirement. And so let me start now with getting my ducks in a row and doing the right things to prepare for retirement in case my children don't want to come in. So I think it certainly now is less of business owners now don't necessarily make that assumption as frequently that their children would like to work in the business or will come work in the family business.
So then follow up on that is, as you brought into this conversation on both ends, whether it's the older generation or current generation or even the generation that might be stepping in, what is your experience so far in working with these family business owners where eventually, whether it's a comment or maybe your go-to question in your toolkit that gets their light bulb to go off finally?
In the importance of succession planning?
Not just succession, but realizing, hey, maybe I shouldn't just assume on either side. Like either the younger generation just assuming, oh yeah, I'm in the family business. Obviously, I would quote unquote get the business, or the older generation quote unquote assuming, oh, obviously the younger generation would want in the business. But I imagine again that elephant room, no one has really broached about that. So what is your go-to tool to get both sides to have that light bulb click off?
Yeah, again, I go back to one of our foundational tools, which we call the Vision Traction Organizer. And that's where we lay out what are the core values for this business? What's the core focus for this business? What's our sweet spot? What's our purpose, cause, or passion? And what are we just really great at? What's our niche? There's a marketing strategy component in there as well. And then getting really clear on what's the 10-year target. So where do we see this business in 10 years? And it's one sentence. And sometimes 10 years it can vary a little bit. It can be anywhere to 5 to 30 years. So I just work with those individual business owners to see what time frame feels best for them. And ultimately, it's just this big business goal, and it's a lighthouse or a clarity. It's our where do we see ourselves, and keeps us focused on where we're ultimately going. And then being able to break that down into a much more tangible 3-year picture. So not just revenue, profit goals, but also in 3 years, close your eyes and where do you see this business, and really picture it. What does it feel like to work in this business? What does it look like to work in this business? How many employees do we have? How many locations do we have? And then breaking that down even further into the traction side of it, which is 1-year plan and quarterly rocks, and then capturing what are the major challenges in our business on an issues list. But I think that vision side of the Vision Traction Organizer is so important for creating clarity and alignment between those two generations, the current generation and the future generation. And once there can be, even if there's not agreement, you start to smoke out what the issues are if there is an agreement there.
Yeah.
And so if the current generation, we'll call it first generation, if that founder is very clear on where they see the business in 10 years, but that second generation can't see themselves working in that type of business, then it becomes very clear to both that this isn't the best place for the second generation. And if the second generation doesn't want to move into this business, the first generation can then begin to look at other options. Am I selling? are we ultimately going to close? What does this look like for the business? And so just being able to get such clarity on where the business is going helps facilitate those very necessary and important conversations so that the family can stay intact on the family side of things. And it doesn't have to be a negative thing. There can be disagreement, but there's just such clarity if you're not aligned that then both parties can make the decisions that are best for them individually.
So it's essentially just addressing, instead of just kicking the can down the road, is just finding really early on whether or not this is even going to work.
Yeah. And I think that's so important for both generations to find. But my personal experience, and I'll share something that's vulnerable, but I'm willing to share because I think it's really important. I think that clarity, if I had that clarity in what the future of the clubs would be or what the future of my family business would be, I would have made different decisions in my life, mainly personally. Professionally, I'm forever grateful for the opportunities I had, for the crash course in business I had. There's no other situation that I could draw up where I would have received the experience and the knowledge and the opportunities that I had in the roles that I served within the family business. So I'm forever grateful for that learning curve, very steep and very quick, but I'm forever grateful for it. But on the personal side, when I was the general manager of a private country club at the age of 28 and just spinning my wheels and figuring it out, I wasn't qualified. I had no idea what I was doing. I felt the obligation and the pressure to serve the business and the team and my stepfather well. And in that world or in that situation, I couldn't see how I could pursue that career and work in the family business and work 70 to 80 hours a week and start a family. So I chose not to start a family. And I think that's a forever decision. And that decision was made in my late 20s, early 30s. And because of the promise that was made and where the family business was going. And I think if those open, honest conversations could have been had within our family, I would have made different decisions personally for my own life. And I think that's just really important to note that sometimes we don't, by kicking the can down the road, we're not always aware of the implications that might have personally or professionally.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I imagine perhaps there's those that are listening on the other side might have agreeing, nodding, oh man, I wish I could have had known. Apparently I'm not the only one experiencing or regretting some of the decisions, or even those who are just that same 28-year-old thinking, holy crap, she's talking about me. What advice or words of wisdom would you impart on her or him in terms of making that decision or that crossroad of life? Obligation to family, or let that go and make my own family? Like, how do you even balance or even answer that?
Yeah, it's really tough. And even going back to my 28-year-old self, I'm not sure that I would listen to myself even at 28, but
like a time machine, you go back, hey, you don't make this decision, don't go. And you go, oh no, I'm 28, I know what I'm doing.
Exactly. But no, for that individual, I certainly, and I go back to EOS tools, which sounds, hopefully doesn't take away from the personal side of it and the emotional side of it. Just like it's so important to have that clarity on values and core focus in your own business, it's that important to have clarity to your personal core values or your family's core values and your core focus as a family. And I think family overrides business every day. Get really clear on your core values and your core focus. And whether it's something as personal as what I just shared as starting a family, if starting a family is important for you and for your future, don't let the demands of your career or your business deter you from that. Stay laser focused on what's really important to you and your family.
Thank you for sharing that. And kind of looking a little deeper beyond just your whole background and your experience, and now trying to help other family businesses succeed, or even especially for business owners admitting it in spite of themselves. Those that are just kind of listening in as to hearing the term EOS for the first time ever. Okay, operating system. What does that look like? I guess the question I'm trying to get to is, what does a perfect client look like to you? Not just a family business, but perhaps maybe that someone that's sitting there, or as you use the term, spinning their wheel. What does that look like? When should someone that's listening in realize, yeah, I need to reach out to someone like a Jacqueline because I have no idea what I'm doing?
Yeah. And first, let me say that they absolutely know what they're doing. It just feels a little chaotic and as if they don't know what they're doing, maybe, and they perhaps just need a little structure around it. So let me take your question and I'll pop back a little bit because I really haven't even explained the entrepreneurial operating system itself. One way I love to look at this and create some clarity is business experts will say that business owners need 3 people in their corner. So a coach, so someone to help them in executive level get out of your own head. A peer group, where do you bounce ideas off of and learn best practices within your industry or amongst other executives. And then third is an operating system. And an operating system is just how are you organizing all the moving parts of your business? So the entrepreneurial operating system fulfills that third role. It's a bunch of simple, practical, real world tools. You're not going to find any magic pills or silver bullets in EOS. There's components in tons of business books out there. What's really great is how it brings together all of those leadership, management, and business principles into one system that really feeds off of itself. So EOS is a way of harmonizing all the moving parts in your business. It helps business owners run a better business, optimize their business so they can live a better life. So these business owners and family business owners out there who maybe feel like they're spinning their wheels and don't know what they're doing, again, you absolutely know what you're doing. You also recognize that there's probably a better way. So an ideal client for us, generally 10 to 250 employees. They have a leadership team. They are willing to be open, honest, vulnerable. They're growth-minded, and they're willing to maybe operate a little bit different than they have in the past. So sometimes that piece can be a little difficult. If you're really stuck in your ways, EOS is probably not for you. The other piece is that you know, that family business owner that would be interested in EOS also recognizes that with structure comes liberation. So those who find structure to be limiting may not love the idea of EOS. But if you think that that structure component would also add freedom to your life or feel liberating to you, then EOS might be a great fit.
It almost sounds like I might have to bring another gentleman of a podcast you might be familiar with, Jocko Willenick.
Yeah.
He used the term extreme ownership, or in this case, one of his books is freedom through discipline, or something around that particular theme.
Yeah. And it's exactly that, where learning this new way of operating initially feels a little muddy and a little messy. And every client I've had will question at some point. But this system is proven. Gino Wickman has tested it. He's proven the process. He's gone through and he's pulled every lever. What tool do we teach where? How do we introduce the different pieces? And he found the best way. And there's over 28,000 companies running on EOS worldwide. And once an entrepreneur or business leader and their team has started getting through the messy and really embraced the chaos that can sometimes come with change. Once you can push through that, then there's such clarity on the other side of it. And those are I get messages from my clients if we just had the best meeting, and meetings are oftentimes dreadful and unproductive. And so to get a message that's, hey, we just had a meeting and we rated it a 10 and everyone found it so productive and we love the accountability component. And those are the wins. And just like everything, change can be challenging, and we just have to push through the uncomfortable at times, but there's a better way on the other side.
Of that, what's the most memorable light bulb moment from a client?
Let's see. I'll go back to my brothers. I think one of the things, and again, so common in family businesses, when I started with them, I asked them to send, if they have an organizational chart, send me what you have. And I looked at this organizational chart, and like most businesses, family businesses, There's one person reporting to 3 people, and it's just so unclear where responsibility falls. And it's because family businesses, we're scrappy. We'll figure it out. Everyone wears whatever hat's necessary. And that can be a great culture to have to some degree, or a great mindset to have. But again, there's such freedom that comes with clarity. And so this particular team, as we worked through their accountability chart, it took longer than some clients. And that was to be expected, because everyone had this, oh, we're willing to do whatever it takes. And so why does one person need to report to one person? But as we worked through their accountability chart at a speed that worked best for them, I don't dictate that. I'm here to facilitate and help coach through that process. But meeting our clients where they're at is really important to us as well. So I worked through that process with them, and to have them all of a sudden that light bulb went off on, oh, we understand why it's so important for our managers and our staff to understand who they're reporting to, exactly what they're responsible for, what winning looks like in that seat, and then understanding the importance that had on ultimately obtaining the culture they're desiring for their company. Mm-hmm. And the clarity and roles between brothers, because they were stepping on each other's feet all day long, and they both wanted the best for the business. Yeah. They just weren't clear on who was doing what when. So they were both doing all the things, stepping on each other's toes along the way and wasting time. So for them now to have clearly defined roles within the company and understand exactly what they're responsible for, they can divide and conquer.
Yeah. So as opposed to just duplicating their efforts and going 78-hour work weeks.
Exactly. Yeah. They have more time with their families and can enjoy. They both just went on spring break a couple of weeks ago and got to enjoy time with their families, and their business is still thriving.
Since a lot of your questioning is for the audience and also to your clients, I guess what kind of put you in a hot seat is, as we're closing out, is what is kind of your 5-year or 10-year plan for yourself? So that would be our closeout question.
Yeah.
What is your, whether it's personal or business, or maybe a little merge of both. So that'll be your, think about a question of 5 to 10 years.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you some time to think about that. So as we're closing down to our lovely legalese section of the show here, this show is sponsored by yours truly, Anthony Chen with Lighthouse Financial Network. Securities and advisory services offered through Osaic, member FINRA SIPC. Osaic is separately owned, and other entities and or marketing names, products or services referenced here are independent of Osaic. Our main office address is at 575 Broad Hollow Road in Melville, New York, 11747. You can best reach me either through my email or just my full name, Anthony, CHEN, at lfnllc.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm probably already a few Anthony Chens out there with a lighthouse tag or banner behind his profile. That being said, bringing our guests back, the question was, what is your 5 or 10-year plan, whether it's personal or business or a little blend of both?
Yeah, I think a little of both. EOS Worldwide has this idea of what your EOS life is. And so for me, I would love to have a full practice, which is probably about 25 clients for the year. And then in that, also being able to work and serve within my community. We have a wonderful community here in Alpharetta, and I love being a part of it, enjoying the hobbies that I choose to enjoy, which I'm an equestrian, so I love riding my horse and getting to enjoy that here in the area as well. And then seeing those 25 clients win. It lights my heart on fire to see clients go through the transformation and go from experiencing chaos or near burnout or actual burnout, and being able to truly transform their company in whatever way that looks like for them, and create a business that will have a legacy and continue on, and to find the joy in that, so that those entrepreneurs can go and live their ideal life, their EOS life.
Yeah. Wow. Again, thank you again for sharing a lot of your personal story and trying to help the listeners understand, hey, they're not alone. They're not the only one that went through this, and especially as you're coming to that particular crossroad of life. So one last closeout question is, for the younger listeners that are also having that question of self-doubt, like anyone that's run a business or entrepreneur, always sleeping awake and awake at night, like, am I doing everything right? Am I really cut out for this? And also coming to cross business and or family. And you mentioned family always first. What last words of wisdom would you give to our younger listeners that are under 30?
You're definitely not alone. You said it, Anthony, but first I'd say they're not alone. And if you're working in the family business, that feeling of being overwhelmed or trying to carry it all is, again, not unusual. So I think my advice to especially the younger generation is, again, just get really clear on what as success, get really clear on your values, what's most important to you. Where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? This is an exercise I do with myself on a regular basis. I love to sit down and just take some time and reflect and maybe write 5, 10, 15 things of what I want to be true in 10 years. But a really neat way of writing it is write it as if it's already true. So when you sit down and you reflect on where you see yourself in 5 to 10 years, if you want a family, do you have an idea of how many kids you do want? So I have 2 kids that I show up lovingly and presently for every day, not writing it I want, right? I have. So write it as if it's already happened, and then let that be the lighthouse or the guiding light of the decisions that you make every day, making sure that every small decision you're making throughout the day aligns with where you see yourself in 5 to 10 years.
Thank you. I think that's the mic drop moment right there. Well, thank you again for sharing your story, and we'll love to hear more from you, perhaps maybe a year or maybe even 5 years from now, of what your client and practice looks like and getting to embrace more of your hobby as an equestrian. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me today, Anthony.
Thank you. As we're closing out with Anthony's financial take with our guest, Jacqueline Jensen here, I'm not sure I can even come up anywhere close in terms of dropping off a better jewels of words of wisdom on the financial side, other than to reiterate having that focus on what your life's vision and goals are, particularly on the family side. I may have already reiterated in the show in the past about money can always be remade and earned back. You can't buy back time. I'm just going to throw out my bias hat out there. I'm going to agree with Jacqueline on here, and maybe it's a little bit more personal for me, is that if you come to the crossroad between financial decision or family decision, my bias would err a little bit more on I know it's coming odd from a financial guy, more on the family than the financial side of things. But that's my financial take, or maybe I should rebrand it to family take. But that's the end for the show. So thank you for listening in to Family Business Radio.